how do you kind of really figure out who you are and what you do? I mean, I think that's all of us ask ourselves now, both in our business and our personal life. And from the stories, I understand Roger's taking a course at Harvard, and as he refers to a really curmudgeon professor, a marketing whiz, called Roger out at the front of the class and say, you know, what do you do? And Roger said, well, you know, I'm a restaurant guy. And he said, oh, really? Here's your assignment for next semester. Go back and study. This is your assignment. So Roger did that. He went back and looked at the history of legal seafoods, their product, et cetera, and he came back and turned in the paper, and the professor looked at it, and he held the paper in front of his face and said, Roger, who are you? What do you do? What's your business? Roger said, I'm in the fish business. And he said that was the most, sort of an epiphany. But it illustrates, you know, a person focusing on really what is the core of the business. And everything else comes from that. We all should be so privileged and lucky to have that kind of epiphany. It is my great pleasure to introduce President, CEO of Legal Seafoods, Roger Berkowitz.
Thank you very much. I can cross that part off. You know, it's interesting. We do have, you mentioned oysters and the oyster promotion coming up. Has anyone ever heard the adage, eat fish, live longer, eat oysters, love longer? It's true. No, this is very true. There was some years ago at Harvard, there was a nutritionist named Neil Solomon who did a study of men over 40. And one group of men tended to be a little lethargic, unathletic, low sex drives, and tended to have very little zinc in their system, and typically didn't eat any shellfish. The other group of men over 40 who were very athletic, high sex drives, really motivated, tended to have a lot of zinc in their system, and they kind of tied it into their shellfish consumption, particularly around the North Atlantic, because that's where the richest waters are. And so that was sort of led to some credibility about the benefits of zinc in oysters. Well, several years later, there was another researcher out of MIT named Noel Solomon, no relation, and he started to theorize, gee, if men had more oysters in their system, you know, what could happen? And so he wanted to experiment with athletes, and what he ended up doing is he asked me if I knew any athletes that would be interested in eating oysters before games. So I said, okay, well, I'll find some. And there were some members of the New England Patriots. This was before they were really good, but so I didn't want that to taint the results. But nonetheless, it was actually a lot of the linemen would eat oysters before a game, and they would swear that their performance was enhanced, because the theory behind it is, if you have more zinc in your system, and the more you sweat, the more zinc you lose. But if you have a higher zinc buildup, you're going to perform better and just have that extra bit of energy. And so we have been doing this. Guys like John Hanna were having the oysters, and he swore by them. And then the Patriots were going to New York to play the Jets one day. And they wanted the oysters, but they thought they might get too messy, so we said, okay, why don't we pack them in plastic containers? We'll take them out of the shell. And so we did that, and the Patriots, I remember watching the game that day, and the announcers kept saying, this one player, Hasselbeck, Matt's father, Don Hasselbeck, was I think he was a tight end at the time, and the announcers kept saying, this guy's having the game of his career. You know, he was kind of a backup, you know, receiver, but he said it was unbelievable. He ended up scoring 2 or 3 touchdowns, ran for, I don't know how many yards after catch, but anyway. So the Patriots ended up winning that game. I got a call from the Patriots afterwards asking me if there was anything wrong with the oysters. And I said, no, you know, we served them all weekend, not an issue. He said, well, one of the players really complained of sort of having an an upset stomach. It just didn't feel right after he had the oysters. So it was Hasselback. And so we tried to figure out how many he consumed, and we weren't sure. So let's go back to the plastic containers. We figured out that Don Hasselback consumed 8 dozen oysters. and he was on a zinc high. So look what it did for Hasselback. And one other quick story. The other theory is men who eat oysters have a higher tendency of producing male offspring than female offspring. And yeah, I talked about this a little bit, and we had a restaurant at the time at the Park Plaza Hotel, and Artie was the doorman out front, and he had heard me, talk about this, and he had 3 daughters. And he said, my wife and I are tempted to try for another, but really, really like a son. So I said, Artie, this is not an actual proven science, but I said, you're going to be increasing your chances if you have oysters, probably a zinc buildup in your system. I'd say about 3 weeks in advance of conception. So Artie said, okay. And so for 3 weeks, Artie would come in and pick up 2 or 3 dozen oysters and bring them home. Well, a couple of months later, Artie's all excited, his wife's pregnant, they know they're going to have a son, and so through the ensuing 9 months, Artie's on cloud 9, and then his wife delivers. And Artie came in to see me with somewhat mixed emotions, and he said the baby's very healthy, we're very happy. It was a daughter. And I said, Artie, I know you wanted a son. I said, this increased your chances. I said, look, you took the oysters home, you ate them, and he stopped me. He goes, I gave them to my wife. so you have to follow direction. Thank you for having me back again. I think after I did this after the last 5 years, I wasn't sure I was going to get another invitation. But thank you anyway. Let me just sort of weigh in at with the economy today, what we see out there, and some of the changes taking place, and then I'll sort of give a sort of brief history of legal and how we've evolved over time and what we're kind of seeing out there for the future now. I think that there is somewhat of a seismic change taking place that is different than previous recessions. I've always been a big optimist, and every time there's a recession, I'm always very excited about the recovery. I think that there will be a recovery, but I think it's going to be awfully slow. Some of the people that I've spoken to that know certainly far more about economics are sort of weighing in on this angle as well. But I read an article recently that kind of puts it all together and why we may not see the dramatic increase in the response to the uptick in the economy. And one of the things that's happened is in previous recessions, baby boomers have always sort of retrenched and figured out a new strategy, how to bring it forward. The thing that's different perhaps about this economy is that a disproportionate number of baby boomers are beyond their peak earning years. And what's happening is that they have lost money in their 401ks, they've lost money in stock, they've lost money on the values of their homes, and so they are staying in their jobs longer, which is retarding sort of the next generation for taking over for them. This is the group that was very much into conspicuous consumption. These are the people now that are downsizing. They're not spending as much money. They're changing their lifestyles. I think I read an article where Mercedes-Benz was cutting back a third of their production, particularly on the high end, is reflective of this, this direction.